Okay, cool. So I guess let's do the introductions first and kind of establish our positions. My name's Brian. I am what's often referred to as a hard atheist or a agnostic atheist. Um, Personally, I think it's kind of a silly label, but that's for another topic. So, atheist, obviously, I lack the belief uh, that in the claim that the God exists or some convoluted shit. I don't believe there's a God. So who's next? Go with Adam.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
What's up? I'm Adam. I am kind of an anti-dogma. I kind of fell into anti-religion here recently, but at the same time, I used to say spiritual but not religious, but now I kind of realize how much of a cop-out that is. So now I call myself an anti-dogma pantheist, which is a little bit of a poo in itself, but what can I say? It's kind of where I stand. So I tend to reject ideas of personal gods, but at the same time, I'm super open-minded to the experience of spirituality, and I'm open to the idea that the religions are trying to describe some sort of transcendence through myth. But I stand very hard by the fact that I think it's myth.
Okay. Cool. Thanks, Annie. If you're ready.
Yeah. Okay, my name is Annie, and I'm a Christian. Not sure there's more to be said here. Except that, just want to ask a quick question. Is everyone here from Debate Faith?
Yes.
I'm not.
Oh.
Thing.
Oh.
I was in Debate Faith briefly, but I kind of stepped out of the debate forum for a bit, so I haven't gotten back into that one in particular.
I am.
Okay.
I know who Dave is.
Me.
Yeah, so there's two of us, I guess. That's about it.
There's two people from Debate Faith?
Yeah, I'm from Debate Faith as well, obviously.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Go ahead and call on people.
Yeah. We got Benny. I know Benny is, but it doesn't look like he's there. Well, anyway, let's include that too if you're from Debate Faith or where you're from, I guess.
Oh yeah. One more thing. My Wi-Fi has this really bad habit of turning on and off randomly. So if I leave the call, don't be surprised. I'll try to come back.
Okay. Cool. Looks like Benny's not there, so let's go to Dave.
I'm Dave, and I'm atheist, obviously, as anybody who knows me from Debate Faith will know. And I live in Wales, basically. But I don't believe in the existence of God. I'm not like one of those agnostic type atheists. I just don't believe God exists.
Okay, cool. Joshua, sorry. Go ahead.
Josh is fine. I would actually go with Brian's sentiments exactly, that strong atheism, whatever the weird term has ended up at, though the terms are often a bit of a mess of people trying to cheat in arguments and not just explain why they think what they think.
Cool, thanks.
Are you Christian atheist, or do you already say that?
No, regular, quote-unquote regular atheism.
Oh, okay.
The epistemology is a bit of a mess, but yes.
Okay, should we call you Ocean?
Yeah. Let's see. I am a polytheist, and I ascribe to Celtic and Nordic polytheism, Northern European. So there's that, and I am from Debate Faith.
Okay, cool. Thanks. And we got Rudy.
Hi. I am also an atheist.
You guys have overrun the place. I'm just gonna say.
Yeah.
I know Benny's a theist.
However, I do like to add that I guess I would like to be distinguished as a, and I found out about this term on the philosophy page that we're all from. What is it called? A naturalistic pantheist. I don't know if that's the same as atheist or not, but I think I would be categorized more towards that than a strict militant atheist. I'm not from the Bay Area. I'm more from I'm still in California, but more south.
All right, cool. Thanks. We've got Sarah, who's got in line before Thomas, so let's go with Sarah next. So, Sarah, can you use your mic?
She's got one. She might be taking a second, though.
Okay. Well, let's go with Thomas next, then.
Hi, I'm Thomas, and I'm from Toronto, Canada. And I think I met Brian on philosophy discussions group, and I'm also an atheist. And in terms of other positions, I'm not really sure. I'm a transcendental idealist, like Kant's philosophy. I like metaphysics and that type of stuff. And I'm also an atheist. Okay, the mic's open.
Cool. Okay, looks like Sarah's ready.
Hello. I'm Sarah, and I've known Ocean for a while, and I'm a Wiccan.
Okay, so pardon my ignorance, but would that put you more in the atheist camp or the theist camp or something else?
I mean, within the theist camp, I'm polytheist though, so I'm more in the pagan community.
Okay, cool, that's clear. Cool, anybody got any questions before we proceed? Looks like not. Okay, so the topic is, does God, or in the case of polytheist gods, do gods exist? That grammatically, that's really hard to put together.
Does gods exist?
Does gods exist? No.
I don't know.
And since I think the atheists are the majority here, I guess I'd like to start with atheist or polytheist. Go ahead and put forth, pretty generally, if you'd like, what convinced you or compelled you to believe that God or gods exist.
I mean, you said atheist or polytheist. Do you want...
Theists or polytheists.
Oh, you want us to go first? That's weird.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's mostly my beliefs are grounded in history and heritage, and that has a lot to do with my reasoning for it. And beyond that, it's kind of personal experiences, revelation, and so on, just through my exploration in what I consider spirituality. And
What is
I guess,
that?
are there?
What is that you consider spirituality?
It's hard to define, honestly. And I know that kind of throws a wrench into having a conversation about it. Joshua is having a lot of background reverb, and it's distracting. Thank you. I guess what would you be wondering about? I don't deal well with open questions, and I know that I made a very vague statement about saying what I consider spirituality. But do you have a specific question?
Well, you said history, heritage, and your path in spirituality. Does that mean meditation or prayer, or looking for oneness, or looking for unity, or looking for state of consciousness, or who knows?
It's kind of all of the above.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that there was a friend of mine, another friend of mine who's pagan, put it interestingly that science is good for understanding the natural world, and the gods are great for understanding yourself.
Interesting.
I really like that. I might use that.
You steal everything from me, though, Sarah.
So,
Good
Sarah,
ideas.
so Sarah and Ocean, you have basically the same position? you'd say?
Similar.
Similar.
We're surprisingly similar.
Similar.
We met actually when we had different belief systems. She actually then more similar to what I am now. I changed. But we were actually talking recently, and we were like, "Oh, we agree a lot." That's funny, and we came to our conclusions very separately.
Okay.
Yeah, I was kind of going into my experiences and how I became this way and why I believe that they exist. I
we
was
got
raised. What?
I said, "How we got crazy."
How we got crazy, yes.
Yes.
Craziness runs in my family, so there's that. But, I mean, in general, my house was void of almost any and all religion. I wasn't raised Christian. I wasn't raised in any regard with that. Even though my grandfather is like a minister and, father's minister's son. We all know those stereotypes. But when I was being raised, it was very much, you cannot say bless you in my house, because it automatically becomes a question of, well, why are you saying these things? Why are you saying these things? Why do you think something exists? And at the age of like 7, I'm just kind of like, I have no clue what you're talking about. Why are you yelling at me? But as I got older, I kind of just had a sense that, like, it was just kind of this overwhelming feeling, like, I feel like there can't be just nothing. And it was just that experience of, I would look at my dog and I'd be playing with my dog. Something gave my dog life. What it is, I have no idea. So that kind of translated into a very agnostic viewpoint of, I don't know what it is, but I know that something exists, because I can't believe that there is nothing that I can't, for whatever reason, believe that there is absolutely nothing, that everything has to come from something. Man and woman can create life, so why can't something create me? And when I was in college, I got more into paganism and looking into the different areas and things like that. And I got more into Wicca, specifically focusing on the duist of there is a god and there is a goddess. Because in my mind, logical mind, man and woman create life. If there's a man, there has to be a woman, which is one of the reasons I can't go Christianity. But when it came to me and kind of my thing, it's very similar to Ocean in that I can't, like, it's very personal experiences and things like that kind of just to help to do everything within the spirituality and everything like that. Mine is a lot more through meditation, through nature itself, and doing rituals and practices and things like that, than anything else to help me feel like I am one with what I am doing personally.
Okay, cool. Quite thorough, thanks.
I have a quick question for you, Sarah, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
What do the rituals do for you? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess, I missed out on most of the introductions, but I guess for if you're Christian or atheist or whatever the case may be, it's pretty much the same. But for me, it just helps me to feel more on the same level. Like a lot of like Christians or something like that will do it through prayer or singing or whatever the case may be. For me, it's like if I, on my altar, I have one of each element of some sort. So I have 4 chalices, and I have one with nothing in it, one with water, one with earth, and then I have a candle in the other, so that I can light it and represent fire. And for those 4, I can then feel united and kind of almost on the same plane with them, and then that way I can kind of feel like I can talk to them, and that's kind of like my channel with them and myself, so that I can have their attention and be like, okay, this is what I'm asking, and this is what I need help with, or I need guidance, or whatever the case may be. And I do tarot, and the whole other gamut too. But that one moment just kind of helps to channel everything together for me.
Okay. I was going to go with Annie next, but he just probably lost his connection.
We're introducing ourselves, that's what it says?
What's that?
We're introducing ourselves?
Oh, well, we just finished.
We did earlier, but I didn't hear. Benny, you didn't get the chance, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
Benny, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I have to see why. I'm Ben. I'm a Christian. I'm not entirely sure what to say. I don't want to give away too much information about like my personal life.
What flavor Christian are you?
Lutheran.
Lutheran. Okay, cool.
Benny, I was just asking Ocean and Sarah, who are Wiccans, to...
not Wiccan. I'm not, anyway.
Not Wiccan, sorry, polytheist.
Yeah, I'm Druid. Sarah's Wiccan. There's a
Oh,
very
that would
subtle distinction between the two. So.
Okay, so Ocean, who is a polytheist, a Druid, and Sarah, who's a Wiccan, to describe basically what compelled them towards their position. So, Benny, same question to you. What compelled you towards Christianity?
Well, to be honest, I was born into it, but I have taken critical view of different things and stuff like that. Like I've read, well, I haven't completely read the Quran. But I've read like certain religious books just to get a feel of what they are and stuff like that. But hello?
Okay, so yeah, the topic is does God exist? And you obviously are in the camp that believes God does exist. So was there anything in particular that convinced you of that?
Well, just that there's certain things that I can't explain otherwise, like how you have non-tangible ideas that are absolute, like something, the logic, or like math, like 2 + 2 or 2 always equals 4. Like, is that something that could randomly? I mean, this is not the whole of my argument. There's like several different pieces of it, but I'd say that's part of it. Or the idea of a standard for everything.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, Annie, if you're here and your connection is working, could you go ahead and describe your position?
Yeah. Didn't I already say I was a Christian?
Yeah. He's
right, but
why do you believe in God?
question
Is the
to that.
kind of the question on the board.
Yeah, the follow-up question to that is what compelled you to take the position you have right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sure. Pretty much arguments from natural theology. One of them, I think the strongest one for me is probably the first cause argument. Basically, done over, right? As Aristotle, only personal beings can do that. So hence, there has to be a personal being with power, to create everything, or to set everything in motion, so to speak.
Okay. Cool. Thanks. We had a couple pantheists here. If either or both of you would like to describe your position a little more for us.
I'll go. My background first. I started out as sort of born into fundamentalist Christianity of the I guess it's classified as non-denominational, or I guess like the people that the church that I was a part of classified itself as non-denominational. So it kind of had like a little bit of like a lot of like different branches. I think my mom is Pentecostal. Anyway, so I grew up with that in mind, and then come high school, I have a feeling like a lot of people, a lot of fundamentalist Christians, or maybe Christians, I don't know, in general, when they get like different opinions, or maybe when they get like something called the internet, they access to the internet, they are you know, sort of thrust into like this this sort of like atheist nexus, I guess, and it's like not long after that that you kind of start like questioning what everything basically that you're told not to question, and you know, sooner or later you sort of become atheist. For me, it was Christian fundamentalist, then it was atheist, militant atheist. I don't know. Before that, it was agnostic atheist and deist, and then right now I sort of still classify myself as atheist, but I guess I was saying earlier naturalistic pantheist because I don't know. I guess there's like a lot that I guess science can't really like test for. You know what I mean? There's a lot that like I get a lot of influence from like the physics branches. The like I haven't really like studied it a lot, but like M theory and like a lot of like atomic theory, and so a lot of like philosophical like thought experiments sort of like influence like just cast like doubt on like what science currently knows. I mean, if you look at science throughout like the years, like we keep on like improving on our knowledge. Fast forward that maybe like 1,000 years, what does that mean? Is there like a is there a possibility of like a singularity that I don't know if you want to call it God or not? Is there like a possibility of, you know, there's like so many like different like branches off of that thought, and so right now I just sort of like consider myself like open to that, and yeah.
Okay, cool. To be honest, I'm probably most ignorant of that position, the pantheist position. You said you also would label yourself as an atheist, so would it fit under the umbrella of non-theism?
That is tricky. I mean, I don't like consider myself to have like a dogma based on a like holy text written by people from like thousands of years ago, written by I don't know, some like famous I guess what is it? The famous like American from like 200 years ago. Any of the recent religions, I don't consider myself like to be theistic in that sense. But I mean, I sort of like identify with a lot of, I guess it's more like philosophical. A lot of the like philosophy that theists tend to talk about, I sort of like identify with that, and then a lot of like what atheists say. At the same time, I also identify with that. So I guess it's a lot with what they say more than like what they are defined as. So I guess like if you were to call like the collective like beliefs, I don't know if it's you want to call it beliefs, but of like the two like groups, like sort of like averaged out. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Okay, so in regard to the question, does God exist, how would you respond?
I don't know. I guess, I mean, even like the Christian God, I mean, at first you're kind of like, nah, like for sure, like he doesn't exist. This was based on some, you know, to put it bluntly, some goat herdsmen from like, what is it, like 3,000 years ago-ish, who were, I don't know, possibly influenced from previous religions, and you can see like the origin of how religions like came to be, and so does that mean that that particular God concept doesn't exist because humans invented it. I'm not sure. I'm gonna say like no for the purposes of like being answering the question, but I think like on a more like on a higher like philosophical level, I guess. I mean, there's like some possibility. I don't know, like some alternate universe or something where that is a possibility. I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
So no.
Right. Interesting. Adam, you're also a pantheist as well, is that right?
That's right.
And
So
would
I
you
guess
say-
I should.
Oh, go ahead.
I guess I should kind of start with my story too. I was raised a Roman Catholic and confirmed Catholic in 8th grade, but almost right away, I kind of started late, maybe 3rd, 4th grade, and almost right away, I didn't understand the opposing ideas of an all-loving God being able to torture someone for, say, eating a piece of fruit. And it also didn't make sense to me that the original sin would wash down even to babies today. You know what I mean? So right away, even though I was raised Catholic and was kind of a serious Catholic for, say, 4 years, even then I didn't quite buy it. And then as a teenager, I moved in with my dad, who's a Jew. And then I actually went to Israel and then throughout college I kind of found Eastern traditions, Buddhism, Taoism, like that. And then after college, after I became an engineer, I was kind of more atheist because it was just that Eastern shit just wasn't very applicable to modern life. So then I went to Israel as a Jew because there's a birthright trip. Either way, I got to go to Israel and tour it, and I had many, many spiritual experiences. So I was like, well, atheism, it doesn't cut it for me because there's these experiences. So that kind of brought me back, and okay, well, I feel like there is a divine presence, but it's definitely not a personal God, because if it is a personal God, he's got to be a dick. You know what I mean? And not to mention there seems to be more and more naturalistic explanations for damn near everything. So that makes me a naturalist, but at the same time I had these spiritual experiences which made me know that there is some sort of divine presence, unity, that oneness that you can get in touch with. But I know it's a non-personal thing because the decisions that could be made would be all twisted. So I said it's definitely not a personal one, and naturalistic explanations work best. So that brought me to naturalistic pantheism, similar to Rudy.
Okay, got it. So the same question I asked Rudy, I'd like to pose to you. In regards to the question, does God exist, would you answer yes or no, or something else? Ooh. Adam, I don't think we can hear you. Can anybody hear Adam?
I cannot.
Me neither.
No, I can't hear him.
Damn.
Let's see.
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, yay, he's back.
Woohoo! So personal God, no. It seems like there's a unifying presence, and that unifying presence that one can get in touch with through experiences like uplifting music or group meditation or even group prayer. There's ways to uplift your consciousness in order to get in touch with this. It seems to be a unifying energy, but that's not I can't define this thing, okay? Don't ask me to define this thing. So if it's a presence of unity in the universe, I would say yes, but a personal God, no.
Okay, that's pretty clear to me. So we've got, I guess, 4 atheists, Dave, Josh, and Thomas, and myself. Is that right? Okay. Where Dave is, it's like 2 in the morning, so he's looking a little sleepy, so let's get him talking.
Yeah, sorry about that. I am a little bit knackered.
No, it's understandable. It's 2 o'clock there. So same question.
Well, I've always been atheist. I've never really found the arguments that compelling for a God. I think the questions that it tries to answer, it just, you have to ask them same questions of the God itself. Like they say God answers the infinite regress. I don't think it particularly does. I'm not particularly fond of the idea that there was ever a literal nothing. Um, I don't think, theists, or particular theists, argue that an immaterial God can exist in the literal nothing, and I don't think that's possible. Because in order for something to exist in something, it implies a locality. And if there's no locality, how can something exist in a locality? And when I look around, what I see are natural explanations for things. Of course, there's lots of questions that we don't have answers for at the moment, obviously. But I find human nature to be kind of animalistic. And I find evolution to be a far better explanation for things. I don't buy arguments like, where does morality come from? I think we define morality as conscious thinking beings. And we can see just by looking around that there is no general morality. There isn't one person, there isn't one unifying morality or anything like that. It's just, I don't buy the arguments, basically. I don't buy the first cause argument because God basically would have had to have started somewhere. So what caused God to want to cause, do you know what I mean? It's just more infinite regress. I just don't buy the arguments, basically.
Do you not think that the idea of God, a creator God, being infinite, like not having a beginning as part of the nature of its definition, not being a good addressing of that infinite regress?
No, I don't at all. Because you would have to follow God backwards through the things that it did. Like God isn't, you get particular like Christians or Muslims who say God is beyond laws like cause and effect. But if God was beyond,
so.
Yeah, but time is basically, it's a measure of events, isn't it? God would have to exist in infinite time, because without time,
right? I mean, I would think that there would be no time before God. Just from a classical theist perspective, that if you have a God that is infinite, part of that the way that would function is that time being kind of a measurement of a series of moments. The initial moment would include God, if you could even have an initial moment.
But then each thing that God did is a moment, isn't it? Interconnected to the moment before. And if God is bound by cause and effect, then they're all...
I don't claim to know the function of what a moment would be without time before creation. Because I think that time is valuable in how we perceive the universe. But something that would be the initiator of the universe,
well, from what
might
I
be
understand,
outside of that perception.
Is the nature of time is still very much not understood. It's like, is it actually...
Right, that's another thing, is that time may all be happening at once anyway, and that there is only one moment.
Okay, but if you're going to say that God created the universe and God is outside time, then we would see no... I mean, whenever we see time, we see a series of moments. And God creating the universe would be a moment of time. You would have no universe. The moment before that, you would have God creating the universe. The moment before that, you'd have God deciding to create the universe. So there would always be a moment before each of those.
I think that you're impressing your perception of time onto a God that would exist in a world without it.
But how
I
does
think that's flawed.
anything...
Well, I mean, I don't know how, but
Okay, so then
I can say that would not be part, like, that would be asking the wrong questions.
I don't
The
see
way that
how
you're
it is
approaching
asking.
Well,
I
because
don't
there's
see.
no time. If there's no moments.
Okay, but you're declaring that there's no time, but when we look at it, we can see evidence that there is time, because there are a series of moments where God did things.
Could there be a before time? And like, I think if you're going to if you have an infinite God which initiates the universe, then if you have something that initiates time, that which did that would exist without it.
But how does it exist without time? You're simply making.
I'm not saying that I know.
Yeah,
so
I think
basically
the
I don't.
problem is that it's a bit of a weird proposal in that if you accept that we can't explain it, so it's reasonable to have one view of it, you have to also admit that any explanation for this time regress issue, which seems like a legitimate issue, the God explanation is not better than any other explanation you could posit, so it's not clear why you would think it's a good argument for God versus for we don't know something.
I'm not saying that it is or isn't a better explanation. I'm saying that the questions that he's asking about God wouldn't apply to the concept.
But again, you're basically just dismissing the idea and saying, well, no, God exists outside of time.
I'm not saying that God exists or that he doesn't. I'm saying, like, when you're talking about moments in which God does certain things, the parameters that you're putting him in require for time to be a thing. And I'm saying that within the concept of an entity that predates time, so to speak, we wouldn't be dealing with that as a concept. So when you're asking those questions, that it doesn't make sense to the concept. You're impressing your own concept upon it, which isn't the reality. So it's essentially straw manning the position.
No,
then you try to put that toward God.
It's not straw manning the position. It's saying that I find the position to be incorrect. I find the concept to be flawed because it declares this one thing, and yet when we observe it, we see this thing that it declares not to have.
I think the issue here, and this is part of why I'm an atheist, is that we're treading kind of a thin line between an inconsistency and or a paradox and incredulity. So people put forth the question, for example, can God lift a rock so heavy he can't lift it? And what they're trying to do is point out that certain attributes or qualities of God are logically inconsistent. They're paradoxical, so they cannot possibly exist based on them. Hold on.
Let
me finish my point here.
Yeah.
They're trying to put forth the idea that such a God cannot. If a God had both qualities, it would be logically consistent, so we couldn't conceive of it, so it couldn't exist. And this thing about time and God's actions seems to me to be kind of treading that line between, is it a paradox to commit certain actions outside of time, because that's how we conceive of actions and motion, things like that, or is there a possible world, or is there a possible plane of existence where these two seeming incompatibilities could actually be true, and are we just being incredulous? Anyway.
What I would put forward that is, if God has a creator God, I want to put that forward because I don't necessarily believe this. I'm just kind of putting forward the idea that if a creator God exists, however it is that he acts would be through a method that is outside of our understanding of time and how moments act inside of this universe which he constructed.
Right, so my response to that would be, I don't see how any human being with our limited rationality and ability to conceive could actually conceive of such an entity. And
Right.
so I don't see any
Don't
good
either.
reason to believe that that's the case, much less that's likely the case.
Yeah, I think.
The point that I'm making is mainly about the questions that are being asked, and the way to address the questions that are being asked is that those particular questions that he was putting forward are that I don't think those are the right questions to ask, just because of how the concept is framed. And there's definitely other things to bring to it, which, like what you said about it being inconceivable, perhaps, to our minds. It could be a good argument against it, but also that even that addressing of it only goes so far to me.
Oh, sure. I don't think Dave's saying that in and of itself was the sufficient condition to make him atheist. I think he was just bringing up an example.
Well, yeah, but like when he was talking about moments and about an entity that wouldn't be dealing with moments. That's why I was saying that when God acts, he would be acting it through within a set of parameters that are completely unfamiliar to us.
Mm.
Okay, but then what you're doing is basically saying God can do this, therefore that's it.
I'm saying if he existed, this is what he did. Not God exists, therefore.
I think it boils down to
starting with if. And I think that if we're going to be talking about God, then the if is a good place to start. Is if God exists, then here's what we would be dealing with. Or if a creator God exists. Or especially an all-knowing, all-powerful, whatever, like very Christian idea.
For how it could do these things. I mean, when we look at the God concept, we do see moments of time. We see no universe. Like, take the example, God created everything. We see nothing, then everything. So that's a moment of time. We can declare that the start of time, if you like.
Yeah, the only moment that we see is the first one.
Yeah, but before that, God still existed, which means that there was a moment of time before the creation. There was the moment where God decided to create the universe. And then there would have to be a moment.
Well, you just said that there was time before time then. And which is part of my issue with what you're saying, because you're killing the if then. With, if God then, so if God is an entity that exists before time, then he would have to be acting within parameters that are not time.
What I'm saying is that God cannot exist and perform actions without some form of time existing. How can
Maybe there was something that wasn't time that I would not be able to explain to you. That would be something about the parameters of how he is able to act, if you would call whatever it is that initiates the creation an act.
Explain to me how, though.
I don't know. I'm not giving you an explanation of that. I'm simply framing why the question you're asking doesn't work.
But it does work for me.
I understand that. I'm just saying it doesn't work for me.
I think it boils down to this. I think on the atheist side, it's just like special pleading. It's like, okay, if God exists in this, and then you got nothing else. So it just seems like special pleading every time it like goes back to all the special qualities I can't quite account for. Put it on a God.
Yeah, it's basically just saying God can do this, so therefore this is possible. No explanation for how. It's just God exists outside of time.
Well, I haven't said that.
You're not saying that.
I've just talked about where the subject matter as a conversation topic. Keep in mind, this is not a God that I believe in.
No, I know. But that's why I'm just.
I'm saying if we're going to talk about it, we should do it honestly. And I think that the questions that you asked, I'm pointing out that it is.
I'm pointing out.
Maybe it's not dishonest, but it's.
I'm pointing out
kind of
why.
Ignores important factors to the concept.
But it doesn't. It's saying that I find the concept flawed because it claims X, but we see Y. And then you're saying, well, no, Y doesn't count because I claim X.
I think that you can take the parameters that I put forward and say that I don't believe in God because there is no answer to what that parameter would be of how a God would act outside of time or without time.
I mean, I
So
think
if there's going to be an initiation of the universe before time, whatever it is that happened had to have had something going on, and since we don't know what that is, cannot explain it, has no predictive capability, doesn't really apply to our lives, I don't believe it. That's fine to me. But and I think that that's honest and responding to the parameters of the concept appropriately. But when you're asking about, what was before God, well, nothing, because you don't have time there to talk about. It's not a tool.
I think broadly there's an issue with theism that I sort of call like the arbitrariness problem, which is that there are a bunch of these real paradoxes or very difficult questions like how did the universe start or did it start? How is it that things are conscious? There are these questions we don't know the answers to, that there seems to be like a very fundamental problem with them. It's not merely we haven't found the gravity equation yet, but it seems like things behave normally. But theism isn't a particularly good answer because you can propose anything that fits the data. That doesn't mean that whatever you chose to propose is a good proposal. You can propose that there are exactly 7 gods, and it fits the creation issue just as well as 1 or any other number you choose. You can say infinitely many gods, and it explains the phenomena just as well. So I don't know what
That's my actual
logically incoherent is trying to achieve.
My actual position is that there are an innumerable amount of gods, or at least not a number that I'm able to give you. Which I think works better than the monotheist position. It addresses philosophical questions about monotheism better.
I don't know how you can, unless you have a reason for separating this from the view that there's 1 or 2 or 30 or 6.5. I'm sorry if that sounds a bit facetious. This is only interesting if you think there's some particular reason to buy one of the claims about how it actually works.
Well, I buy the claim that there are higher entities due to spiritual reasons that have more to do with me and my experience and perception of the reality that I'm dealing with. Like my beliefs are the sum of my experiences in my life, and I don't believe that I can really just change my beliefs poof for myself. That I believe what I believe as a result of how I've interpreted things. I can think about it, but I come to the conclusions that I come to. So anyway, beyond that, so I believe that there are entities. I think, or that there is a higher power of some kind. If I start there, I think that there's serious issues with the idea of one, namely, if we have if you have the one all-powerful, maximally great entity idea, then you're dealing with paradox questions like, can God make a rock so big he can't lift it, or a lot of questions about his morality, like the Erythro dilemma or the problem of evil. So these are things that kind of stop me from hanging around in monotheism. With polytheism, especially polytheism where the gods are not a source of morality, but they are fallible, not wholly benevolent, not wholly malevolent beings, those philosophical questions are addressed. Can a creator god create a rock too big for him to pick up? Well, yes. But he's not all-powerful, so it doesn't really stop him from doing that. If the problem of evil is addressed because the gods are not wholly benevolent. The Erythro dilemma is addressed because morality has nothing to do with the gods. It's a human construct.
My question would be, though, sure, everyone has their own personal experiences, and in that regard, they're the authority of their own personal experiences. Nobody can really authoritatively tell you you didn't have that experience, you didn't feel that. But our beliefs are essentially the inferences we make based on not only those experiences, but certain facts or knowledge that exist about the world. So when you had certain experiences, what compelled you to infer, for example, gods, as opposed to deism, as opposed to like the Buddhist take on like the Tao, or a force within the world, or rather, or for example, that this experience could plausibly have naturalistic explanations.
I don't discount the idea of naturalistic explanations. I just don't assume them. I also don't necessarily. I don't hold a truth position. I don't say that I can prove any of these things. It's the position that I hold because that's how some of my interpretations. That's the belief that's given me. Like I've tried being an atheist before. It doesn't work with me very well. And not because it's like sad or anything. It's just because it's like this doesn't make sense to me. This does. So, and with what were you saying about like there's polytheism compared to like the Tao? Because I also believe in the Tao. So that's
that would be my question, because I've had experiences that I've heard described as spiritual experiences, but my conclusion is atheism. And right. I'm a hard atheist, so you can go ahead and it wouldn't be a straw man to say that I declare there is no God, there are no gods. So I wonder what you find inconsistent or incompatible with that position.
Oh yeah, I want to ask you about that. Would you consider that a faith claim?
Sorry, asking me or Ocean?
Yeah, asking you.
Would I consider that a faith claim? The claim that there is no God?
Yeah. Absolutely, because you make an absolute statement.
That claim is... Wait a minute, I'm making an absolute statement. What does that mean?
Well, because you're saying there is no God. You're not saying I think there is no God. See the difference?
Sure. I say there is no God the same way I'd say, there's a hand in front of my face, or I'm going to die someday.
But you can prove that.
You can prove that I'm going to die someday. How would you do that?
Well, okay.
Well, what I'm saying is all of these statements I make are essentially inductive arguments that I cannot be absolutely in the sense of 100% certain about, but I don't feel the need to qualify each and every one of them. So that's the same way I'm making the statement there is no God. If that makes sense. I get that a lot on the debate faith forum when I say there's no God or I know there's no God. I get hit with that, you can't be 100% certain, you can't deductively prove that, and I know, but I'm just using language in the very ordinary sense. When I say like, it takes 10 minutes to get to the station from here. Maybe something will happen that will make it take 11 minutes. But when I make that statement, I'm not saying I'm so certain that if some sort of evidence or argument were to come up that would demonstrate my position is wrong, I wouldn't change my mind.
What are you on the? You're familiar with the Dawkins scale, I assume.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. Do you ascribe yourself a number or?
Wait a minute. What is the 7 again?
Seven is there is absolutely no God. Period. 6 is I am really, really, really sure, but it's still possible.
Yeah, I had actually like an hour-long discussion about how stupid that is. If I had to give myself a number, I'm a 6, and how 7 is, even if we take it as like a valid measurement of where your beliefs are, 7 is a ridiculous position to hold.
All right. Yeah, I agree. As is 1, which is right. I know with absolute certainty there is.
So to answer Ben's earlier question, is the claim there is no God a faith position? I'd say no, but I'd say there's certain axioms in my proposition that are, in a manner of speaking, faith-based.
Okay.
What are a few of them?
Let's see. For example, that the 3 laws of thought: the law of non-contradiction, law of excluded middle, and what's the other one? Law of identity. That these things hold true. That's essentially one might call a faith based belief.
They're axiomatic.
Right.
Yeah.
So I can't
Well,
I can't prove
Logic
them. I
itself
just
is
assume them.
axiomatic.
Sorry.
he's not a
I think
seven.
logic itself is axiomatic.
That's
Can
a
I
type of logic, though.
butt in
Yeah.
for a second? I want to butt in for a little bit.
How does that get you to hard atheism, though, man? That logical absolutes are absolute? Ta-da! How does that get you to atheism?
It doesn't. But Dave, for example, presented an argument that I find not strong enough in and of itself, but pretty compelling argument for atheism. But I have to assume certain things, like, for example, if you're going to claim an omnipotent God in the total sense, like it can do absolutely anything, and then you present a question like, can it lift a rock so heavy you can't? Can it create a rock so heavy you can't lift it? You essentially, to me, based on those certain axioms, argued that God out of existence.
Can I address that actually? Because I think that if we take Allah, Allah is meant to be a maximally great, all-powerful being that is also all-knowing and everywhere. One of the nitpicks that Islam has with Christianity is that, and we all, everybody from Debate Faith has seen posts from Muslims. You know it's true. They have the belief that Jesus cannot be God because God cannot put himself into the body of a man. Now, they did put, there's a cannot there. And it's not because it's physically impossible for God to pull that off. If the Allah in concept could, in theory, do that. But the moment that he does, he's no longer God, because he's then not everywhere and all-powerful and so on. So the answer to the can God create a rock he's so big question would be that he can, but the moment that he does, he's not God anymore. He loses the status. So he won't. As with the Muslim belief that God would not have become Jesus, because then he would not be God.
Right.
Is that a good answer?
That is a good answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that that's so contradictory itself, but in the very least, some of the more layman descriptions or attributions of God seem to me just on the face, or at face value, just not possible. In the sense that if I adhere to these laws of thought, then they automatically write themselves out of existence, like a God being, for instance, a God knowing all things that are going to happen, and yet we have free will in the classical sense.
I do agree with you that
That
is
would be
a contradiction.
allowing it to happen rather than actively causing it to happen.
Well, I think
that the rock thing comes up though, because that means that God has given up his status of being all-knowing. He allows for something to happen to which he does not know what the future is going to be. So the status as God of being all-knowing is not there anymore. So having absolute free will beyond God's knowledge would be a fallacy in that sense. In the same sense as
I would
Big
agree.
Rock.
Acting contrary to what he knows is going to happen, yeah, I would agree with that.
Right. But really, but when you think about that further, God does not give free will. God gives the illusion of it.
I guess.
Such an argument right there, I think, would at least solve the problem of the contradiction. I don't know if it would affect other, how I put it, other attributes or properties of that God, but yeah, sure there are responses. I'm just saying that there are certain descriptions of a God or a deity that just do not work as long as you adhere to those three axioms.
I would say I think we might be getting a bit too far into technical theology, where whether these are contradictions is a very legitimate question, but it requires very careful reading of where the arguments are coming from. Like, I think the rock thing's actually not a problem, but it would take like 5 or 10 minutes to explain why I don't think it's a problem. And it's completely legitimate debate, but sort of awkward to have just talking because we can't draw diagrams or whatever. And I also think we're missing the, there's sort of two wings to an atheism position, which is, one is, do you think there's some reason to believe this is incoherent? Like you think the frame X is all-knowing just doesn't make any sense, or you think the proposition, the thing that was there before time and was conscious and doing stuff, is a contradiction. The other half of it is the arguments that are of the form, I just don't see why I should accept this as even a plausible explanation, or it seems like you're talking about a theory, but there's no real reason to buy this theory. And those are different things, because you can take the stance that maybe you're right, but why should I believe you? And that's different from taking the stance, this is obviously wrong.
Right. I think that's a really good point, because when I do label myself as hard atheist, Gnostic atheist, the common erroneous assumption I'm hit with is like, oh, you've decided. There's nothing I can do to change your mind. You're basically entrenched in this position, and that's not quite what I mean. What I mean is more of what Josh is saying, is that certainly there are quite a few plausible explanations in terms of origin of the universe, origin of morality, etc., but I don't find any of them more reasonable or more plausible than the position that God doesn't exist. That one so far is the most compelling to me.
Yeah, I would frame mine as like, the problem for me is that a God theory needs to be, I guess I call it, it needs to not be merely a there is a big man in the universe theory. So if you have reason to believe that there is some sort of interstellar civilization that is able to warp gravity or build wormholes, something like that, that'd be really cool if you could prove it and win a few Nobels. But it wouldn't be God, it would just be a big thing that can do big stuff. So to me the problem is that the God proposals either fall into, we can explain this very well with there just being a big man up in the sky somewhere, or they're incoherent. And when they all split into those two options, you get an atheism stance, which is, I think I have justification for saying this can't happen, because the explanations are either incoherent or there's a big guy explanations.
If I can, though, I'd like to go back to Ocean. I asked a question that I didn't get a response to. We kind of went into a tangent.
Yeah, you asked a hard question, and I was hoping you were going to forget it.
Ha, no way. I like grilling people. What about the atheist position, whether it's hard or soft or whatever? Did you find inconsistent or incredulous or hard to grasp or whatever?
The atheist position, it doesn't really entail much other than, no God. So there's multiple positions you can have kind of around that idea, but it was just that part that I was like, meh. It was a while ago that I decided to, like, all right, I'm going to try on the atheist hat. I'm going to see kind of how this works. Because I understand the arguments for it, I do. Especially when applied with naturalism. Naturalism is comes to a reasonable conclusion of, well, if God is going to be a topic of conversation, it's not one that should be included in naturalism because it doesn't provide any predictive capability. That makes sense to me. It's like we can discount the idea completely because it really doesn't affect us. When it comes right down to it, though, if I'm going to be holding a worldview, I have to have one that I see as worth betting on. And as an atheist, the betting on that was something that didn't sit well with me, for one reason or another, mainly to do with my spirituality. No, it didn't have to do with Pascal's wager. because I don't think that there's, like, within my religion, I don't think that there's any negative effect, like, as far as an afterlife is concerned, for not believing. I don't think that believing is something that one needs to do for any kind of salvation. I think that, you kind of make your own meaning on that. But yeah, the Pascal's wager thing. Forgive my use of the word bet, because it doesn't. I'm not talking about something like Pascal's wager. Worth betting on is basically, am I satisfied with my life in relation to this perception, this lens that I'm looking through in order to see reality? And it didn't work with me. It's not a position that I can hold and feel okay, if that makes any sense.
So, Ocean, if I'm understanding you correctly, it was at least in part intuitive.
Yeah, it's very much intuitive. To me. And I understand for some people it's not, or it's intuitively the other way, but I can only hold my position.
Well, it's interesting in that may be the only distinction between us.
Sure, that's possible.
Because if I'm going to be pretty transparent, intuitively, atheism doesn't really sit well with me either, but I'm just so compelled by arguments for it that's where, as you put it, I'd rather, make my bet.
Right, and because of that intuitive no that sits there, I've decided that it's not worth going through my life with that little chip on my shoulder. I figure that it's more valuable to me to explore why that is there and explore what the answers are to those kind of questions that have been presented by other cultures in the past, and see whether or not I agree with it. And I think that a lot of it is based on intuition of, like, okay, I'm reading this. Does this sing or does it not? Do I find this to be something that's worth betting on or not? And Christianity didn't work with me. I was born and raised a Christian. As much as Bionic Dance is wants to say that I'm an atheist when I was born. I was a Christian for a very long time.
I love that argument.
But eventually
we can go out to the beach and count all the trillions of specks of sand
that are atheists. Yeah.
They all lack a belief in God.
Atheists by far outnumber theists because of the number of brains. By comparison to atoms.
Let me get some other people. I wanted to ask Adam, Benny, Rudy, and Sarah, to what degree would you say your position was reached intuitively?
Mine was kind of it definitely experience had to do with it, Rationally, I came to atheism, and I guess intuitively I knew that wasn't really consistent with my experience of spirituality, because there is such a thing as interconnectedness and higher vibration that I can get to through things like meditation and really connected with nature sometimes, So it was a mix of intuition, which led me to the feeling of divinity, and also the rationality, which kind of got me away from any personal intervention or benevolence or judgment one way or another.
Cool. Rudy or Sarah or Benny, do you want to comment on that?
The question was, to what extent does intuition play?
Yeah, to what extent, I guess, would you say your personal experience played in to the position as opposed to some sort of objective arguments or data?
Well, I would say I just hadn't seen an objective argument from atheism that can explain, say, the absolute, sort of what I started with, the absolute ideas, because the universe was really sort of thrown together in a random sort of way. I know they don't like to use random. But there's let's see here. This sort of way, everything seems to fit together, and in a way that I don't see could have happened any other way. I don't know. That wasn't a very good explanation.
No, I understand. Because there seems to be certain. Hold on, I'm getting an echo here. I think it's from you, Ben. Because the universe seems to be. I hate to use the word constructed. I can't think of a non-anthropomorphic word. Constructed, set up, built in a way that has a semblance of order and that's intelligibly decipherable. That it seems implausible to you that it could have come about randomly or naturally rather than creatively. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much.
Okay. I'm also curious from Ocean, Rudy, Sarah, and Adam, and Benny's point of view. How important is it to you that others come to the same or similar conclusion you did?
I could absolutely care less.
Not at all.
Not at all. I have if I meet another Wiccan and they don't hold the same values that I do as a Wiccan or whatever, I really do not care one way or another what their conclusion is or anything like that. And to actually comment on the intuition question as well that you had posed, mine is almost, I would say about 80% based on intuition, just because of different experiences I have had, and I'm totally cool talking about some of them. But one of the big ones for me was something that really just encompassed all of the different ideals that I had about what a religion or what something should entail. So I had a lot of ideas growing up about this is what I think I believe, this is what it is, and things like that, like reincarnation, and I always kind of phrased it as Pocahontas, like every tree has a spirit, has a name, and all that stuff. So it was when I found Wicca, it was kind of like, okay, it clicks for me, it all matches. So there was a rational thought to it, but it was very much an intuition thing first and foremost that helped me to create and hold the position that I have.
Okay. Also, with when Sarah was talking about bumping into other Wiccans that might not have the same ideas with her, and Sarah's well aware of this, what I'm about to say, that in the pagan community, pagans are very different from one another, and we all pat each other in the back and we're like, yay, but we disagree on a lot. And it's funny that even though Sarah and I are, she's Wiccan, I'm Druid, but I actually hold more in common with her than I do with a lot of other Druids that I've met, which is funny. But that's just kind of the nature of paganism as a whole.
I'm kind of wondering, though, for people who have quite distinct worldviews from yours, like someone like myself who believes there are no gods or gods at all, and that's unreasonable to hold that assumption, or someone like Benny who has is monotheistic and believes in a god of particular character and qualities, which I assume are quite different than the gods you believe in. I guess, how do you feel about how do I put it? How concerned are you with the fact that we have very, very separate worldviews?
The same way I would feel about any pagan that has completely separate worldviews that I do. Like, it's just like, okay, you believe in your gods or you're not gods, and I've got mine. I'm totally down. And as far as monotheists are concerned, I'm my position on that is, your God could be real, but I'm doubtful the stories about him are true, or that he's as infinitely powerful as he claims to be. He might be a very egotistical God. With atheists, it's more of, well, you're missing out. And that's pretty much the summary of it. And the only time that I take an issue is when those beliefs are causing harm in some way or limiting others in some way.
Agreed. Or especially for me, if they're then pushed onto me as if it's the only way to believe. That's my biggest thing, and I do live in the Bible Belt. I live in the South as a pagan, and it's very difficult. But for me, it's like one brother is, flat out pure, almost militant atheist. One brother is agnostic, and then my mom is a non-denominational Christian. So it was very interesting for me when I personally came out of the broom closet, because everyone just kind of like shrugged their shoulders and said, okay, we have like a whole plethora of family here going on. But it really is just kind of like my family honestly jokes about it. Like my dad said earlier, because I'm getting my master's and I want to get my doctorate, he's like, oh cool, you're going to be an actual witch doctor. But we, that's kind of how that's just how
funny. I'm sorry, okay.
I laughed at it too. It's hilarious. But that's just kind of how it's almost been ingrained into me, is that it's not something to be taken seriously. Just as much as they absolutely love the color blue, they absolutely believe that there is nothing, that there is no God, that there's nothing else. It is just part of who they are. You're not going to change that. You just kind of have to accept it the way it is. And if they decide to change their mind one day because if something happens, cool, that's awesome. In my personal beliefs, there is no hell. So it's like, I don't think that anything negative can come from humankind when, we pass on or whatever. We could become great big beautiful trees, whatever works. But it's not as... That's one of the things that I really love about being a pagan, is it's not constrictive in any way. There's no limits to the confines of morality or anything like that. It's like you can, believe in the flying spaghetti monster. Really just don't care.
Well, I guess one reason I reached the conclusion I did is that based on what is true and what is real, certain actions or certain decisions will lead us to a greater degree of happiness or well-being. So, like, if we were to tacitly agree that, happiness is a value or well-being is a value, like I want to enjoy my life and I want to be healthy and happy for as long as possible, then I think it kind of behooves us to try to discern what's more likely true than not. For example, if there is an afterlife, and if the decisions you make in this life are going to affect the conditions of your afterlife, then we would be more compelled to behave a certain way rather than another. Whereas if there isn't one, and this is the only life, we might make different decisions in order to increase that level of happiness. So from that starting point, I kind of asked questions and looked into arguments both ways. And it seemed to me more compelling that there probably isn't an afterlife, so I ought to behave, this way rather than that way. Do you guys have any comments or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I tend to not even consider the afterlife, and instead try to, like I said, I try to, my spirituality is kind of working on developing a connection with everything that I know is connected. So in that, I just try to, I notice that when I act better, more things line up, in usually a good way. So if I do better consistently, then it'll all line up. So it's really acting in accord with reality rather than what's concerned with what's going to happen afterwards. What I try to do is be consistent with reality the best I can.
and therein kind of lies a question in what is reality, and I think this existential question about whether God exists or heaven exists is kind of pertinent to that, to answering that.
Well, I think a couple things are real. One is time. Time is definitely real because moment by moment goes by, and everybody experiences at least this moment we're having right now. So time is real. I would say that what we know is real. Many things have been proven by science beyond a reasonable doubt. We know those things are real. And mystery is real. The things we don't know. The things we don't know, and the things we don't know. So I think those three things really encompass what is reality. But there's also a subjective experience aspect to it. And that's where you have to find out what situation you're in and try to act with the best integrity you can, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm a little perplexed because we have at least three people, maybe four, who have a different worldview or different answer to that existential question, but don't seem particularly compelled to convince anyone else of their position. So I'm not really sure how to.
You're like the only atheist that's got some fight in him in this room. I'm kind of surprised.
He's got some what?
He's got some fight in him up in here. Like,
fight. Oh, I like discussions.
Yeah, no, that's
it's
obvious. That's just opposite of
cool.
my usual experience.
It's cool if you guys would rather go with the just like an open discussion rather than any kind of debate or position taking. That's cool too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't really care if anybody takes my position. I just don't want them to believe false things. Like if something's demonstrably false, you ought to change your thinking on that, or at least try to. Sometimes it's harder than others, but you got to mold your thinking in order to, like I said, be in accord with reality as best you can, depending on the situation.
That was kind of the point I was going to make too, and you have to think about it in terms of the law of non-contradiction. Everyone can't be right, so you want someone to believe what's the truth, and if you have the truth or you think you have the truth, you would want to convince someone of your position. I think that's true of any, not just in religious discussions, but in anything, I think.
Right, I kind of agree with Benny in that I think for the most part, when most people conduct themselves day to day, they, how do I put it, not instinctively, but almost unconsciously apply that law. Like if someone says, this cheeseburgers are really healthy, no, they're not. We want to come to some kind of agreement there because the presumption that we take when we engage in that discussion is we're not both right about this. There's some things in which we can disagree whether you like hamburgers or don't, but when it comes to something factual, a statement about the world, about whether something contains too much fat or contains large amount of fat or it doesn't, we tend to want to kind of coalesce and find some uniformity there. But so I kind of wonder when people take this approach of like I have this belief, and this belief entails a set of facts about the world, like there are gods, and someone has another belief that entails facts about the world that contradict that. Why that's okay? That's okay. I mean, I kind of understand why it is because it's maybe of less consequence, but I think we tend to want to have true beliefs rather than false ones. So
I think I don't even know what you call it. It's some sort of strange like meta philosophy issue that where the stance on theism fits into your list of important issues determines how much you both care about whether people agree with you and care about trying to argue people into it. You can, for instance, be ardently, absolutely an atheist and believe very strongly that you could perfectly argue it, but for some sort of pragmatic reason think it's a bad idea to go around trying to convince people of this. So depending on what you think, you end up having different views on how you think you should handle your views on different issues.
Different straight.
Yeah, like if you think that artificial intelligence could wipe out humanity, you start caring a lot about that. But if you think it can't be dangerous, you don't go around trying to like violently argue that point because it wouldn't matter to you. So, like the views about how much this matters are part of the world views that people have they bring into those sorts of arguments.
Yeah, that's a really intriguing point, I think. I brought up once on Debate Faith, and I'm really hesitant to bring this up, that I am atheist, but I'm actually very provisionally pro-religion. And I really don't want to get into it on that particular forum.
Well, don't
Would
tell
you
the
agree?
others.
Would you agree with Penn Jillette's position?
What is that?
Essentially, he's pro-proselytizing.
Well, I'm kind of neither. I'm ambivalent on proselytizing. I don't think people ought to, but I have no problem with it.
I don't have a problem with it either. I don't see much of a reason to be against it, really. Except
I
that
suppose I'm
it
cynical
can be
on
annoying.
this.
Why
I
are
think people are less. I think people are less internally consistent, so I don't care as much about the proselytizing the God issues or whatever as I do proselytizing can we stop murdering each other over literally nothing, or this law seems kind of stupid, because I don't think these stated motivations people have are part of an actual internal consistent philosophy they actually hold to strongly. It's usually a bunch of ideas that are sort of duct taped and stapled together. So I might not proselytize about issues even if I think I'm very correct and they're very wrong. I might think there's a more important ethical problem or issue with the legal system that I'd rather argue about that just because of how I think it'll play out.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Oh, we got quiet. Okay, that means I got to do something here.
Fix it.
Fix the problem. Quick. Let me see. Does anybody do any good impressions? No? Okay.
I can do an impression. I can do Yoshi. Yoshi.
Oh, nice. All right. Oh man, we've gone way off track here.
1, 2, 3.
I shouldn't have asked. Those are good though. Those are good impressions. I think being originally from a Western country, it can be hard to take a larger scope frame of this existential question and how much it really matters, because I don't live in the States anymore, but I'm in touch with what's going on enough to know that the actions and the consequences that entail certain behaviors do have an impact on us in our lives and things like that, from gay marriage laws, for example, to whether or not evolution should be taught, et cetera, et cetera. Being in Japan, which is where I live now, it probably has affected my anti-theism. It's probably largely contributed to why I'm not anti-theistic anymore. People's metaphysical views don't have such a great impact on their secular lives. In fact, I see quite a bit of benefit of religious beliefs, especially here maybe.
Isn't it majority, not necessarily atheist, but a-religious in Japan?
Depends what you mean by that. I mean, people here do very strictly adhere to certain religious traditions,
Right.
but in terms of Shinto is the major one, but Buddhism is also it's kind of an amalgamation of the two. People adhere to certain traditions periodically, very strictly, but in terms of do they behave any differently than a hard atheist, does? Not really. So, okay, I'll go ahead and throw this question out then. It's kind of in the back of my mind. Given that people who have certain metaphysical views will make certain decisions that will impact your community or your society at large, does that bother you at all from your position?
Are you talking about,
yeah, mostly
making
asking
the
you
decisions?
and Sarah, also Adam and Rudy, but basically anybody. That given if certain people have like a very hard atheist stance or a very fundamental Christian stance, they're going to vote differently. They're going to behave in public differently and things like that. How concerned are you about that sort of thing?
I don't care unless it's hurting someone. Like, yeah.
If you're talking about, like, say, they vote differently than me or something like that, I tend to vote like a religious person, so there's not very much of an effect there. And as far as how atheists vote, as long as you've got a good reason for it, it's not really bothering me. How people vote in America has, like, this could start a completely different conversation, but it has more to do with what issues that you find important and whether or not you believe that anybody can do anything about them. Which is, that again, pretty much an entirely different topic than religion. And as far as how they act in public, I've had conversations with many a street preacher with no issue. I haven't dealt with a street preacher that got in my face and yelled or anything like that, and I've talked to several. While making no bones about the fact that I was not a Christian. So I don't know. I haven't run into really much problem with it, and I live in the Bible Belt, where I'm kind of an oddball. So.
Yeah, as long as you're a decent person, I don't care who you worship or what or why. Just be a decent person. And I figure if you try to believe as many true things as possible and as few false things as possible and act accordingly and be consistent with it, then it doesn't really matter what you believe, in my opinion. But if you strive towards believing true things and not believing false things, usually that ends up in a good place.
Well, let me turn this around to the atheists in the group then. I've been kind of quiet. How do you feel, or what's your attitude towards this sort of position, the pantheist position or the pagan position?
And that we get to vote too.
Yeah, Dave, Josh, or Thomas?
I mean, if I think views are incorrect about the nature of reality, then I think they're incorrect about the nature of reality. But I mean, pragmatically, it's a mix of the extent to which I think it's a meaningful sort of error in like a public social concern sense. Like, it would be a problem if people were like opposed to the use of lumber for anything, based on some sort of respect for nature type issue. But it's this awkward thing that everyone generally thinks is that if other people's views are within the bubble of generally wanting what you generally want, it's less of an issue than if there are people who disagree with you and are trying to achieve things you really, really don't want. So to some extent, you're incorrect and this presents a problem based on my views on what I should be trying to achieve or what I should value. There's this weird relationship where sometimes those are very far apart, sometimes they're very close together, which is why political alliances are often weird ideologically.
And yeah, for me personally, I am pretty apolitical these days, that I don't really take many positions on politics. I will say that theism comes up a lot in politics, though, just in terms of justifying people's positions, like take abortion or gay rights or something like that. A lot of people will say that God doesn't like that kind of stuff. So I'll say there is an effect, I think, that what people believe influences their kind of political persuasions and that type of thing. But for me, these days I tend to stay out of politics personally, so I wouldn't say that it has much of an, I would share, I guess, the opinion that's already been said, that I don't share, or I don't care what somebody believes if it's not some kind of deleterious effect on society or something.
plays little part in politics anymore. It's more social concerns, and for me, it's the impact on society that the beliefs hold that really concerns me. Like, if you're restricting somebody's right to do a particular thing, or like the big argument in America about gay marriage at the minute, we just didn't have that argument here. It was like, yeah, gay marriage, fine, whatever. Those are the things that concern me. It's social impact rather than the person's belief. It's what they do with the belief. That's why, in some cases, religion is actually helpful. Some people do tend to be a better person because of their beliefs. I'd rather not talk about those beliefs if it's going to make them a better person. Like, there's a bloke on the Big Bang, brawl, and he's got a strange Dutch type name. He performs charitable acts solely because he's a Christian, is what he claimed. So I'd rather not talk a person like that out of their religious belief. Their religious beliefs are making them a better person.
Okay, fair enough. Let me throw this last question out there, and after this we can stop, or we can just go wherever you want. I see in the sidebar people are talking about consciousness, so we could bring that up if you want. But let's say I came to you as a pure agnostic, and I say I really have no idea, in the layman's sense, I have no idea whether or not there's a God or there are gods or not. What do you think? Help me kind of understand your position.
It's a little bit different than the direction I thought you were going to go with it. Because I thought you were going to say, what would you, if you had a chance to talk to somebody who was just a pure agnostic, what would you say? Which, yeah, my answer would be go read shit. But as far as helping you understand my position, there's like certain sources I might direct you to and be like, well, here's what I believe. Here's a couple things. Go.
Pretty much.
But because I think that, especially, and I think that Sarah's laughing because this topic comes up with pagans a lot. It's like, why do you actually believe this? Can you help me understand? And that conversation only goes so far most of the time. So a lot of times it's, here's a book.
For the love of God, not Silver Ravenwolf.
Right.
I think I read a book by Ravenwolf in college or something.
Uh-oh. But
maybe that's why I'm not Wiccan.
I'm Wiccan, and I think Ravenwolf is, yeah.
All right. Again, with the pagans disagreeing with each other on fucking everything. But, like, with pagans, it's really hard to say, pagans believe this, because there's really no way to say pagans believe that. You get 7 pagans in the room, you got 7 different religions talking. Even if they all say that they're the same thing, especially with Wiccans. Sorry, Sarah.
It's true.
All right, cool. Yeah, I'm kind of curious to hear from Rudy. I haven't heard from Rudy in a bit. But
what was the question? Consciousness?
No. Well, we could bring it up in a second if you guys don't want to talk about this. But if I came to you as an agnostic, like I don't know what to believe, you're a pantheist. So yeah. What is that all about?
I usually tend to hide it because it's like a sort of like a touchy political topic, and the area that I live in, it's sort of like no one really cares like what you believe as long as you just keep it to yourself. But assuming agnostic came up to me, my cousin's actually an agnostic, and we often he's also a philosophy major, and I'm not a philosophy major, but I like philosophy, and we just talk a lot about God concepts, and I guess I don't know, it would be really like futile to try to like convince him otherwise. Like assuming like I want to convince him to pantheism, because I mean on like the spectrum of beliefs, like it's pretty like close, um, pantheism and like agnosticism. So I don't know if I'd want to like put like effort into like trying to like convince him for that reason. But if it was just like like sharing my beliefs, I guess I would. Um, I've never like really thought about it. I guess because I don't know like any like literature, any like um, do you guys like know any like literature like that's pantheistic? I'm starting to think like it's more like an internet movement, kind of like how people like label like new atheist wave. It's like sort of like a direct like reaction to the
Are you
internet.
talking like Joshua mentioned Spinoza, who was pantheist, or at least puts forward an idea of pantheism. It may not line up with yours. It depends on how much of a deity. Somebody's echoing. It kind of depends on how much of a deity that theistic thing is. Because there's a lot of pagan religions that are pantheist, and then there's Spinoza, which even though they're both pantheists, they're different ideas.
Yeah. I guess I mean I'd have to like refer intellectuals to pantheistic literature. Like most of my friends are pretty much militant atheists. If I like tell them, oh, I'm a pantheist, they're kind of like going to like assume maybe that like you're part of like the new age wave, and so
do you worship Pan?
I guess like just talking about ideas, which is what like we kind of do in a philosophical context.
Pantheism,
kind of like
belief that God is a utility, frying eggs.
Yeah. Interesting question.
Okay, cool.
I would sell somebody on pantheism by telling them that everything's definitely made from the same stuff. We're definitely all star dust from the knowledge that we have right now. And also, there's a spiritual experience that can happen through many means, but it's kind of a given. That's why that's I think one reason why religion thrived for so long is that there is such a thing as a shared spiritual experience, an uplifting feeling, higher vibration, if you will. So since there's that higher vibration and we're made of the same stuff, that higher vibration tends to me to feel. I don't know how to describe the feeling of it other than a feeling of divinity. Maybe it's because it seems omnipresent and able to tap into it at any time, and it is everything. So it's omnipresent and it's omnipotent. It's everything that we know and are. So it's omnipresent and omnipotent. But you got to take away the omnibenevolent, because that's putting a judgment on. That's making it personal. And then we have, what are we left with? Omnipresent, omnipotent, omni-knowledge. And since it is everything, it must know everything by definition, if you define it as is everything. So if that's not a definition for God, I don't know what is. Therefore, everything is a manifestation of it. Bad stuff, good stuff, it all is. It's all disgusting balance.
Okay. No, sorry, I'm not laughing at you, Adam. There's a little comedy show going on in the sideboard there.
Can I take the atheism proselytizing then, I guess?
Sure.
I guess like my earlier idea that to explain it, I would split it into sort of the two different wings that are behind the idea, which is first that a lot of the proposals that would be more interesting seem to have these logical incoherence problems. Like if you try to work out what omniscient would mean, it's actually sort of strange. Like, does God know what God's thinking? Does God know what God is going to be thinking? That's a paradox seems to actually work out for me. Sure, these logical issues with the propositions for God that are philosophically interesting that I think make them not work and make it justified to think there isn't one there. On the other wing of that, though, is the easier stance to defend logically, which is that I think we can explain all the claims religion are making in a naturalistic sense. So we can explain how the churches have survived by talking about human social dynamics and human bonding. Most spiritual experiences seem to be justifiable by understanding brain chemistry. We seem to get better at it over time and better at making chemicals that trigger it and knowing what sort of brain stuff goes on that triggers certain feelings. And that would be the split, is these religious theories don't seem better than the non-religious versions, and the non-religious versions aren't adding anything beyond what we see. And the other side of that is the God stuff that's profound seems to be incoherent. So you end up with like the big man theories or the we're in the matrix theories. Like you can first cause an argument and then say, therefore we're in the matrix. But obviously that's not a God proof if there's an equally plausible we're in the matrix version of it. That's roughly speaking my explanation of the stance.
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of directions we could go from here. There was a discussion about consciousness in the sidebar. I'm a little hesitant to throw that out there because I didn't really present this as a discussion on consciousness, but you guys want to go with that?
I'm trying to catch up on reading what exactly was said about it.
It's about, it went on for a little while.
It's just going on 4 a.m. here, and I'm really starting to fall asleep, so I'm going to have to drop out. I'm really sorry.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for joining me.
No worries. Nice one for inviting us. And if you're still doing the one tomorrow night, I'm definitely going to be involved in that one.
Oh, right. I'm actually not able to do it tomorrow night. It's going to be Wednesday night. And
yeah, that's no worries. I'm off on Thursday.
Okay. In case you guys don't know, that's going to be morality.
Oh, goody.
Yeah, is morality subjective or objective? That age-old question that never gets old.
So it was good meeting you all anyway. Hopefully I'll chat to you all again at some point soon.
All right. Thanks for joining.
No problem. Take it easy, Brian. See you all later.
You too.
See you around. Good talking with you.
Yeah, to echo what Josh is saying, I wouldn't really have an argument to present for why there's consciousness, but if you guys want to talk about it, we can, or we can call it a day right here. Or...
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that could be said, but it gets very, it's very deep. It's not...
That could be a debate in and of itself.
Comments. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be a giant. It definitely is kind of a albatross.
Right, like my view on free will is sort of intractable to my view on how consciousness works, to the extent that I think there's stuff we can know about it directly. So it's like all these very huge issues sort of collapse there, or combine there.
Yeah, I don't really want to throw that into the mix suddenly. I think it's something, we might want to get our thoughts together first. But yeah, I was taken by surprise a bit. I was expecting more kind of hardline theists to have, like Annie, who had their arguments in place, and we're going to present them, and we go back and forth like that.
Well, I'll have my arguments for Wednesday, definitely.
For Wednesday?
Oh,
okay.
Dang. I've had that conversation, and I like that conversation, but I don't think I'll be available for that day. But because I was part of another debate group on Facebook that was a little bit less chaotic than Debate Faith, and like every single Facebook group that is out there. But the conversations when they got serious would usually devolve toward morality. Is it objective or subjective? Like in any conversation on God's existence, on whether or not something is right or wrong, on whether or not the Bible is true. It just goes straight to that. All the arguments break down into that one. So it's why it's a valuable conversation, but damn, it's hard to get anywhere with it too.
That's probably exactly why it's one of my favorite things to talk about, is because when you have an argument, both in like the layman sense or philosophical sense, it often does devolve into, not just are we capable of doing that, but ought we do that, or should we do that?
Right.
It applies to pretty much any facet of life, whether you're talking about religion or just how to behave at the office. So I love it.
I mean, I guess I'm tipping my hand for Wednesday that I probably prepare for. I think the reason is that the only reason we care about being correct is we think there's some moral value attached to it in some sense. Like, I really don't care if my view on whether McDonald's or Wendy's is healthier is correct because I'm not eating there based on a health decision. Like, I think it's a very unimportant question, so I don't devote much time to it. Whereas something like, whereas objective morality, we think it matters because differences in opinion imply vastly different things. Mm-hmm. If you think Star Wars Episode 4 is better than Episode 5, we could talk a lot about that probably. But it's not clear that disagreement implies anything we care about in itself. Whereas it's like, is it okay to run around stabbing people? Well, obviously, if we disagree, this is kind of a substantial difference in behavior.
Right. There are certain things that we react to quite differently, quite more profoundly than other things. If somebody doesn't particularly like science fiction, I don't think we react with disgust per se, or there's no sense of wanting retribution for such an offense. Whereas as Josh pointed out with stabbing, there is that sense. It's almost innate sense of like this has to be equalized. So there has to be retributive action taken for such behavior. And we talk about responsibility and things like that. So yeah, I think it's a really significant discussion. I mean, it's really impromptu, but we could go on with that now. Or I should probably eat lunch pretty soon anyway. I'm getting kind of hungry. So.
Well, if that's the topic we're going to be discussing on Wednesday, then
yeah.
I actually wanted to go back to something. I think you said it, Brian, about the spirituality being explained by neurochemistry.
I think that was Josh.
Josh.
Yeah. I mean,
I think that was me today at least.
Before we segue too hard, I'm going to go ahead and bow out. It was great talking to y'all, and
all right, buddy.
I'm sure that I'll be bumping back in again.
All right,
see you guys around.
Good meeting you.
I'm gonna head out too. I got some homework I got to work on. So it was great talking to you guys, though.
Yeah, I'll make this point and probably bail out too, guys.
I guess this could be over then.
Yeah, it seems like it's winding down. Either way,
all the theists are gone, so there's no more fun to be had. That's what's going on.
Well, Adam, if you want to present your last comment, then we'll wrap up after that. We can do that.
All right. Speaking of the spiritual experience being explained by neurochemistry, that's kind of what's happening, but the spiritual experience itself is more like it's a very subjective thing. That's the objective truth of the subjective experience. So how does that subjective experience happen? Through some sort of, I wish there was a better word for it than this woo-woo raising vibration, but that's the best thing that you can, that's the best way to describe it. So yes, it is explained what's happening through neurochemistry, but how it happens and why it happens is where the spirituality and transcendent meaning comes in, I think.
Yeah,
well, kind of expression of consciousness.
So I admit there's a giant hole here, and I think the reason is that it's trying to explain something from a mathematical or third-person perspective that is intrinsically first-person, in that you can't explain what it's like to go through something without literally just describing it, hoping the other person has the same background, that you can transfer that kind of information because it's very deeply connected to your actual state of being conscious. But the reason I think it matters is that the intuitive arguments for a lot of spiritual positions, I think they run into the problem, for instance, that if somebody like drops acid and they wake up the next day and they say, I had a spiritual experience, nihilism is a correct theory of everything, they're making the same argument that someone is making from saying their spiritual experience told them there's a God. So at the very least, it seems that you have to admit neither of your accounts I shouldn't be persuaded by either account because they're providing the same evidence for different positions.
Yeah, I suppose the reason why I don't bow to one position too much ism or another and am almost anti-dogmatic is that the experience is real. It's a subjective experience explained by neurochemistry. The conclusions to be drawn from it aren't necessarily justified one way or another. So that's why that's why I take people, for Christians, for instance, who say, I believe because there's personal experience. Absolutely you had a personal experience. But how did you draw the conclusion? Through some outside source. Well, damn, that could be wrong. So drawing a conclusion from the experience is where I start to slip. You know, the experience is real, and I believe that everybody can have it through something similar to religion, although dogma gets away with religion.
Yeah, I mean, so I do think sometimes this gets missed. There obviously and definitely can be asymmetric things that different people are justified in believing. So, for instance, I have extremely strong justification for my belief that I'm wearing shoes right now.
Yeah.
I'm literally looking at them. But none of you have a good reason to agree with me because I might be messing with you for the sake of this thought experiment. So people can be justified but not able to prove that they're justified. That's easy enough to show. The issue is more that what often gets mixed up is thinking that something justifies your position and thinking that it's a justification for other people to believe the position.
Mm-hmm.
I think this happens sometimes with mental illness. Like, people don't believe in mental illnesses till an issue makes it hard to refute it. Like, it's a family thing or whatever. Now they sort of can't use the same workarounds because they have to have the same views about their family, for instance. Whereas if you don't know anybody with, I think the odd one is like persistent fatigue or something. I don't know what the name of the condition is. Everyone thinks it's very, very silly unless they know somebody who has it because the person who has that condition explains it in a weird way and it just seems much more reasonable in first person. I forget exactly where I was going with that, but yes, like the huge things about use a simple practical one is, I have good justification for lots of things, like whether I'm wearing shoes right now, how many televisions are in the house I'm sitting in right now.
Yeah.
Whereas, and I'm clearly justified in that, but the only reason you should believe me is that I have no reason to lie about it based on what I'm trying to explain. You have a much lower you have a much lower amount of evidence for that same claim. And it's dangerous when the spiritual arguments are using, I have evidence for something as there is something you should believe because I experienced it.
Yeah, I'm not even claiming evidence, honestly. I just know this shared experience is a real thing. Would you agree with that? That a group of people praising and celebrating the idea of unconditional love would raise all people to just feel better, and they just leave feeling better, feeling a little bit groovy, a little bit more connected.
Yeah, I mean, it's real. Like like the feeling, like people saying like, I feel really great,
Yes.
and I think it's because I'm connected to the Godhead or whatever the terminology is. I don't think they're lying about the nature of the emotional experience.
Yeah.
It seems unlikely that people could lie about that unintentionally.
Yeah, it's a real thing.
Yeah, like in a minor way you could. Like you could just say like, I feel kind of sick when really you're actually like medically depressed. I guess that's a way you could be wrong, but if someone says like I feel really great and euphoric right now, that seems like it's almost certainly true. The difference is that I don't think it's a connection to some transcendental force tends to actually serve as a good explanation, when another good explanation is that humans like being together and singing. And there's nothing about the people's experiences that really suggests to me anything not normal about it.
Yeah, I hear you. That makes sense. I think atheism is very tenable. And I don't blame atheists for not going to where I went with my experience. So
I think a large part of this is the trappings of language, in that we cannot perfectly encode an experience with that particular tool, with terms, in a way that we can be certain the decoder will understand that experience accurately. And so I think oftentimes people talk past each other because in order to attempt to articulate what you went through, you might reach for terms like divine or vibration or things like that. And in many cases, certainly when people use those terms, they're trying to use them quite literally, like they actually think there is a divine entity or a divine force or whatever they want to call it. But what I found as I've talked to more and more pantheists or people who are kind of of the same mindset you are, Adam, is that they're just reaching for some word that will have the connotative impact that they're looking for. And words like divine or God are the closest words they can find. They're kind of approximations rather than explanations. But it can be hard for the listener to discern which is the case. So,
on this thing about experiences, I just want to say that I don't think experiences
absolutely, I hear you, man.
True or false. I think that they just are, and it's the propositions we base off those experiences that are subject to being true or false.
Yeah,
So, and I actually believe that like people's like cognitive bias, like what you believe actually affects what you see. So if you believe that you're communicating with God or something, you will actually experience something. So it's like that you can find what you're looking for type thing. So I'm pretty out there on perception, that I think we can actually affect our experiences by what we come to the experiences with, like in observing.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get across is that words don't have intrinsic meaning. We have ideas, we have feelings, we have experiences and states, and we also have probably an innate ability to communicate linguistically using words. And words are just imperfect attempts to encapsulate a state or a feeling that we had. And so on that level, when people say like, I talked to God, or I heard from God, or I was connected to the divine, on a connotative level, I feel like, yeah, I can relate to that experience because I think I've had an experience that made me feel what you're trying to convey. But on a very literal level, like, are you actually trying to discreetly define or explain the source of your experience? I reject that, which is why I remain atheist.
Yeah, I mean, just for one that's sort of personal, like there was one day where I was just thinking through, I think orbital mechanics, perhaps, and not at a good level. It's not like a physicist. And there was just this weird moment where it clicked, and I felt like I could understand how everything would move in like one very particular moment. Or like if you have a whole galaxy, you can have a very good understanding of how it would move over like half a second in your head. You can know exactly how it all behaves, and it clicked for a second or two, and that feeling is very, very, very weird. because your perspective on how the world works is like, oh, right, the laws of physics are the way things behave. It's the other way around. The way things behave is how you figure out what the laws of physics are. But getting that at a literal level was a very, very weird experience for me. And there are people who would interpret that as having some transcendental meaning, where I interpret it as that was really cool and very interesting, but that there's no overarching thing going on when I figure that out.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to talk about with Ocean a little more, is that, you know, obviously I don't know the particulars of his experience, but because of the experience I have, on a certain intuitive level, atheism doesn't quite, at least hard atheism or naturalism, physicalism, doesn't quite seem sufficient. But I feel that any other conclusions I draw or inferences I make based on that experience are faulty. They're on shaky foundation. And those conclusions would lead to other conclusions that wouldn't, how do I put it? It also wouldn't intuitively make sense. They seem incoherent. They seem incompatible. Things like that. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm just never comfortable with any position.
Actually, the language thing, we were talking about the labeling for atheism earlier a little bit. I think part of what's happened, and it's the phenomenon where people replace the concepts behind the argument with the language we use for the argument. So I can explain my stand, like in a vacuum. You know, if I ran into someone who was just like from a very non-religious country or had never seen these sorts of arguments, I can explain my position in a way that's much clearer than trying to label it properly. And it's not because I feel like my position is particularly nuanced. It's not as if it's so nuanced that it's hard to explain in a few words. It's just that if people have this perception that quote-unquote strong atheism is this particular kind of, I have proven it, I have the math formula proving he's not real, whatever, they may not get that while I certainly think I have proof and justification for thinking there's no God, that doesn't mean it's some very strange, caricatured view of it. Even if I think it's very simple and a very strong argument, it may not be what they're thinking my stance is when they hear it. And
Yeah.
that's a language issue.
Well, yeah, I have that same problem with the political labels.
Yeah,
Can't tell,
politics.
did we lose your audio, or did it drop? Okay. Yeah, the political labels are awful because both political. I'm just using the United States because I'm uncultured, I suppose.
All right, everybody, I'm out of here. Nice talk.
Okay.
But like the labels liberal and conservative don't refer to two different coherent worldviews. They refer to two different coalitions that generally agree with each other more than they agree with the other side.
Yeah, they constantly change.
Yeah, this is probably why I put the hard or agnostic in scare quotes, because it comes with, it's loaded with quite a number of assumptions. Almost immediately that is correlated with nihilism, for one thing, materialism, and oddly enough, I can't quite make sense of this myself. I'm actually more of a dualist, a property dualist, because of like the conscious problem and things like that. So it does seem more conducive to a meaningful conversation to describe a position or stance or whatever than to actually put a label on it.
Yeah, like I guess it's a curve fitting thing. If you're trying to fit your views into other people's, you're trying to map them with other people's views, you end up with this weird, what does this painting look like, when you could instead just take the person to the museum. It would seem like an odd choice if there's like some exhibit you really wanted them to see, and they were quite willing to go to the museum with you, but instead you just pulled up a bunch of similar paintings online. That would be sort of odd if you had no reason for it. Because if you explain the view in a in the quote, I think it's called constructive sense. I don't know the language. Where you're just explaining, this is what I think. Here is why I think that. I think the two functions are: one, I think it communicates it better. Two, I think you start catching what I think are a lot of the issues with religious views. Is that if you try and explain them independently, they start sounding, this is my stance on it, and this is, now there is some more fighting about it, right? They start sounding more like, I think this is true because I feel like this is true, so I have a good reason to think it's true. It's obviously more nuanced than that, but whereas if you're allowed to say, I think similar to these people but a little bit differently, I think it can hide the philosophical stances you're taking by common sensing a lot of it, even though it's more committal than that. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, for Dagon, hope I'm pronouncing that right. Just joined, and we're about to wrap up. About half our members dropped out. I guess it's getting pretty late for everybody, but we'll have another one Wednesday night on morality, or specifically meta ethics.
When's Wednesday? This is a funny time zone issue. I think I'm like 14 hours behind you.
Well, where I am. It's Tuesday.
It's Tuesday. It's 11:15 here. I'm somewhere on the eastern U.S.
On Monday, right?
Yeah, it's Monday.
Right, so it'll be your Wednesday night.
Okay, my Wednesday night.
Yeah, it'll be an hour earlier than this one was.
Okay.
Oh, where are you? I'm going to call you Dagon. I don't know if I'm reading that right, but where are you? Belgium. Ah, Europe. Ooh, okay. That's a little rough. Cool, Josh. I was glad to have you here, especially because you were able to articulate a lot of the positions and arguments I have much better than I could. I'm pretty horrible at that.
Thank you for having me. I don't know where that came from. I guess that I think I burned out on some of the new atheism movement, but only because I thought they were getting... At some point I started thinking, these people don't care enough about actually being right anymore. They recognize that they're right, so they no longer care about being precise about it. And I, for good or bad, care a lot about being very correct when it's a technical issue like that. They're saying the number's bigger than 6, and I'm trying to figure out if it's 7.5 or 7.548, whatever. That kind of deal. Like I have a good background in theology. I could devil's advocate a lot of Aquinas' views very well, just because. Are you familiar with the ontological arguments?
I'm familiar with Anselm's, but I think there are a couple of variations on it.
Yeah, so to anyone who's not familiar, there are a bunch of these arguments that they try to establish that God must exist in a logical sense. So, for instance, if I say there are an infinite number of prime numbers, there's a math proof of that that says, suppose there were only 10 of them. We can prove there's an 11th. And suppose we could have any finite number. Here's a way of deriving a new one. So there must be an infinite number because we've shown there's more than any finite number. They're trying to do a similar sort of thing. They're trying to say there is a being with maximal greatness, and what maximal greatness means.
Of which there's nothing greater, yeah.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of this fighting comes on. The funny thing with these arguments is what they are purporting to do is so strong, and there was an old joke that if you care about philosophy enough, one of them seems completely reasonable to you at some point in your life. Like, I had that day where I read it again, and I was like, what? And just sat there staring at it because it made sense for about 10, 15 minutes. I was like, okay, this works. And how many people are actually persuaded by this, I don't know. But so, for instance, like the new atheist movement just fundamentally refuses to care about that kind of argument. Because they have what is strawmanned as the scientism view. they're carrying it too pragmatic of a level, such that they don't adequately address what I consider to be at least reasonable arguments to make if it would be out of their field of expertise. Like, Dawkins does not understand the ontological argument.
He's not a philosopher. He should stick to his day job.
Because it is in some sense trying to define God into existence, but what it's actually trying to do is define that if we accept these premises, there's a being that falls out of it that has to be there. I think the argument doesn't work, but you have to get to a point where you understand it well enough that you're sure it doesn't work, because it's very peculiar. It has to do with that term maximal greatness, and you get into, I'm using another spoiler for Wednesday, you get into this meta-ethics notion, which is, in my stance on it, the term greatness doesn't make sense as a objective property. Like, we can say this is like a greatly run business, because we can look at other businesses and say, you know, businesses have these values like efficiency and proper use of resources and profitability and margins, and we can compare that to other businesses. But it's sort of weird if you just said, you know, this is a great rock. It's an amazing rock. But what do you mean? I mean, like, this rock has a lot of greatness. That just doesn't work, and I think it ultimately doesn't work.
Yeah, it seems like to lead up to an objective assessment of what great is, you kind of have to agree on the values. But I don't know how you do that objectively.
Yeah, and there's a lot of work there in trying to get ethics to work.
I think the point in the ontological argument is infinite greatness, or something that's as great as can.
Yes, but it's
possible.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
God is that of which nothing greater than can be conceived, I think you said, which is a normal definition.
Yeah, Josh,
by greatness, by greatness they mean order of meaning. So the actual arguments say, you know, obviously humans are, for instance, better at figuring out information than fish. That seems to be true with respect to many, many things. The issue is trying to make this notion of greatness or highness of order, trying to explain why we should think that's a grounded property of the universe versus a description of physical structure. Like, the sun is way bigger than me. It's I don't know what the magnitude is, a few billion probably. But the sun is huge in relation to me. So does that mean it's greater than me? That seems like a very strange, incoherent notion. Yeah, like, am I greater than lizards? Like, I care more about me than I care about lizards. I care about most people more than I care about most lizards. But I don't. The notion you have to defend is there's somehow an actual property relation there that means something other than we're describing systems of things. And that's where I think the ontologicals fall apart. But the short form of that is I've studied enough theology in the particular God arguments.
I think it's supposed to be more powerful than anything else. I think it's great in terms of power. That's what it's supposed to be saying.
Well, one of the premises is that a God that exists is greater than an imaginary God, but it treats existence as just another property where when existence is required to have properties, it's not like other properties, right? So that's, I think, the mistake. It depends what version of the ontological argument you're using, but one of them is like that
I think what
a God
you said
that exists
Kant.
is greater than an imaginary one.
I think that was the version Kant viewed, which was a pile of gold coins is not more valuable, or the idea of a pile of coins is the idea of something just as valuable as a pile of coins. Yeah, my view is, like, I haven't looked at it in a little while. It's more that there's always some weird hidden premise that somehow some aspect of an entity makes it better or greater in an objective sense that I ultimately think doesn't work. There are obviously facts in that matter, like, you know, who can bench press more, me or Schwarzenegger? That's factual. It's certainly strength, but other than being the ability to lift things and some other corollaries like ability to get out from under a car if it crashes into you, the ontologicals seem to fail because they end up committing to the idea that means something in a fundamental way to the universe, not merely like who would you rather have on your like weightlifting team. Non-practical, I guess, is the word.
Those they're called a priori arguments, so they're arguments that come before any observations. That's a priori, and a posteriori is like science and empiricism and stuff. Those are the only arguments that I take seriously, are those a priori deductive arguments, because I don't think there can be any evidence for God because it doesn't generate any testable predictions.
Well, not from in an empirical sense, but I think from like an axiomatic sense. Like you're talking about a priori, I think starting with the a priori and then going to the axiomatic aspect of it, I think you can work it out in that way rather than empirically.
But does it generate like, can you actually do an experiment, or is there any kind of, it doesn't seem to, like, it seems like your experience would be the same either way. Like if God can do anything, then any possible observation you can make would still cohere with God's existence, right? Because he can do anything. So how are you going to make a meaningful experiment? Is a problem. So I don't think it's a matter of
like the notion of experimentation really, really broadly, though. Like, let's see. So, for instance, if you take the stance that consciousness is merely physical, then it should be possible to kill people and they'd go away, which does seem to match with our experience. But we don't need a lab to run that, obviously. So the word experiment, I think, has this. It can mislead people into thinking we actually mean a particular, very systematically organized thing, when it really means can we test reality? Well, can we check reality for answers?
Yeah, if there's a way to get one answer versus another, like it doesn't seem like there's any way to falsify the God hypothesis. Like, how would you prove that God doesn't exist empirically? It doesn't, because he could be anywhere, he could do anything, so there's not any way to actually run a test. So I think the a priori arguments, like that you show God exists by necessity, those are the type of arguments I take seriously, but I don't really take seriously like divine revelation or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. Yeah.
Because deductive arguments are true by necessity, whereas you can just like an experience isn't, universal or something. You have like the problem of induction and other things like, I have problems with perception. You might. Like our experience of the world, we're not infallible, right? We make mistakes, so you can, just have a mistaken experience or something like that too. So I don't. Anyway, science does a good job, like eliminating a lot of our biases and stuff. But even science, like I'm an instrumentalist about science. Like I don't think science makes truth claims, which is a pretty uncommon position. And stuff like that.
I don't know how uncommon it is philosophically. It's very uncommon practically, and I would tend to agree with the naive view that we're trying to figure out how stuff works. So our conclusions are our best thoughts on how stuff works. I don't know what the label for that is.
Well, if you adopt the pragmatic theory of truth, then yeah, science is looking for truth. But under another theory, I don't know, maybe deflationary theory, for example, maybe, science maybe not, maybe isn't looking for truth per se.
Yeah, I think I'm a coherentist about truth, so I think what's true coheres with other things that I know. But pragmatism, my understanding of pragmatic theory of truth is like what's true is what your peers will allow you to get away with saying or something like that. So if nobody calls you out on what you're saying, then it's true.
That's I don't think I wouldn't consider that like truth. That's more like something that hasn't been falsified yet, I guess.
Yeah, well, correspondence theory, I think that's the one most people use, I think, that corresponds to reality. There's key words like correspondence or coherence,
coherence,
deflationary, and pragmatic. Those are the four that I know about.
foundationalism, deflationary, pragmatic. I think that's all I know.
I guess it might be called the correspondence. I'd call it more the something more like the diagramming theory. If you're trying to explain what the hill looks like, you draw a picture of the hill. Trying to explain how reality works, you try and write up an explanation of how it behaves. I think it's correspondence theory, since I heard the term. One note, though, and I think historically this was what happened, the problem with a priori, a posteriori, pardon my Latin being awful, is that it seems you can obviously have conceptual errors. So, like the ontological argument, it's an argument that is disputed because people have a different view of one of the premises. But this is kind of weird if it's analytical because, right, if it's analytical, how do we have a different concept in a fundamental way, where it's not a language issue? Now that we're having trouble translating this idea, because it seems like if you get committed to a priori claims, you then have to admit that if someone disagrees with you, one of you doesn't understand the argument. Whereas, on my views on things, I'm completely willing to accept that someone is either being dishonest with themselves or doesn't understand the argument is always an option, or they're choosing to believe things that are false for some reason, which seems more plausible than all disagreements are because the other person is confused. That seems very untenable because that would seem to spread to morality too. Why is that man a serial killer? Because he just doesn't understand how he should behave. That seems like a very difficult argument to make, but I think it falls out of some of these a priori stances because, or the more important one, the intellectual one, that like the ontological argument, if we disagree on whether or not it's a good argument, where's our disagreement located at? Is it that one of us is confused, or that one of us doesn't understand the argument, or that one of us has a cognitive bias? But it seems like a cognitive bias has to be how you interpret data, not your concepts themselves. Or your concepts can be bad, but it has to be because you're interpreting data.
Yeah, I never thought about that. If there is a disagreement about like some a priori argument, I guess it would lie in the premises, right? Like that most of the time that's what happens is people dispute over the premises, and we'll say that one of them doesn't work out or something like that. But an analytic proposition is like true in virtue of its meaning, like all triangles have three sides or something. That's just a definition of what a triangle is. But yeah, I don't, in terms of like philosophy of semantics, I know a little bit of like semantic externalism versus internalism and that kind of stuff, but yeah, I guess some people could have different, could understand terminology differently, and that could lead them to different conclusions maybe. I guess it would just be ambiguous maybe if the language is ambiguous, like greatness.
I guess the divide I would make is that in the triangle argument, the reason it's analytical is that as long as we have the same conceptual framework, we seem to be able to agree about how math works generally, at least with geometry, because it seems to be the case that we see the same world. So if I explain what a triangle is to you, you have the same idea in your head, or it's somehow perfectly identical in a different system, such that we don't inexplicably disagree later on. So like if I propose the number system, and I explain, like you're explaining to a kid the number system, like, we go 1 through 9, then 10, 11, 12, 13, da-da-da, 100, 101. And you say, okay, here's a number, 5,361. What's the next number? Everyone develops over time, they learn that system, which seems to suggest that we're able to transfer the concept of the number system. Whereas, say, morality, the disagreement seems to be substantial. Like if someone learned the number system wrong, they would say things that are incorrect, and they might be internally consistent. Whereas morality, we seem to agree that there's more than a mere language issue if people disagree.
Yeah, I have a pretty unpopular position when it comes to meta ethics, or I've always been an anti-realist, so I don't think that there is like one right standard, but I was kind of going between non-cognitivism and cognitivism, and I think I am a cognitivist now, but I've been looking at this guy Mackey from Australia who had error theory. So basically now I think that all moral propositions are false because they attribute wrongness, and wrongness just doesn't exist as a property.
Well, I was going to ask you this, but this is probably getting us too much into what we're going to talk about on Wednesday. But
Go ahead.
well, you said if everything is wrong, then how do you make a judgment on anything?
No, nothing is wrong. The only type
Well,
of
same deal then.
What's that?
Same deal. How do you make a judgment on anything?
Well, people's judgments are formed from many different places. Like you could have, like my taste in music or something like that. It would just be like a preference, or like there's many different ways to explain like how judgments come about. And I think also there's like evolutionary reasons, like pragmatic reasons why we value life and that kind of thing. Like we don't kill each other because society wouldn't exist if we're all psychopaths or something like that. So there's like a pragmatic reason why we have a lot of the moral values that we do.
I think Ben's question is more kind of micro scale in that you personally, if you believe that all moral statements are false, then what sort of system or measurement do you use to make a decision or make a judgment?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my own judgments, like I value honesty, I value integrity and that type of thing, but I don't think that if someone breaks whatever my preference is, if someone does something I prefer they not do, I don't think that there's some property of wrongness that gets instantiated into the world, like when they do some kind of behavior or something like that.
So you're more of a non-cognitivist now, is that right?
No, I'm a cognitivist. Like I was before. Like there's an idea called emotivism, and it's called expressivism now, because emotivism had too many problems. But there's different forms of non-cognitivism. I don't know so much about them, but the general idea is that moral judgments are not beliefs. They're not beliefs at all. They're expressions. Just like a smile expresses happiness, a smile can't be true or false, right? It just is. It might be deceptive, like you might be sad and smile or something like that, but it's sometimes it's called the yay boo theory.
Yeah.
So if someone says X is wrong, it's just saying boo X, right? And it's not subject to truth value, or there's a lot of weird problems with that though. And so I've decided that I think error theory makes the most sense. I'm still learning about it. I don't claim to be some kind of expert on it.
I mean, intuitively, it seems moral beliefs seem to obviously be beliefs. Like people clearly think there's a factual issue at hand. Like if I thought someone was being honest and they just really liked some ungodly combination of food and it wasn't dangerous for their health, I would have no problem just accepting that. Whereas if Jack the Ripper was at my house, I would have a problem accepting that, even if I totally believed his opinion, his feelings about things. Like he's not lying to me about his joy in killing prostitutes or whatever. Let's see, the morality thing's Wednesday, but this will be interesting because I've tended to defend some ethical egoism theories on occasion. Because the biggest problem I've seen is when you make a moral theory, it has to deal with the why should I be ethical problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can't explain, because the real question is there justification for acting a certain way, or a certain set of ways, either contextually or universally? You're trying to justify why you ought to act a certain way. And my general opinion has been that egoistic theories have a much more natural advantage of trying to solve that problem, because they're not trying to make you do stuff that's bad for you. which seems to be very convenient if you're trying to explain why someone should act a certain way, if it's also convenient.
Yeah.
But that will be Wednesday, more so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I'd
I don't
love
want to
to.
get too much into this because I would.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that because what one problem I'd like to bring up if somebody is an ethical egoist is, is it moral therefore to do nothing about some travesty that's occurring in another part of the world? I don't think you could argue that we ought to, for example, promote the well-being of others under an ethical egoist stance. If you could, I think it'd be kind of weak. But if you can participate on Wednesday, I'd like to hear that. And
Yeah,
I haven't
I'll
met
try.
anybody who's. What's that?
Yeah, I'll try. I think part of it, I've certainly not worked this out. I guess I'll do some studying now. There's two things that are funny, which is one, the literature contra ethical egoism, in my opinion, is just very awful. Like, it's very low quality. It includes lots of weirdly circular arguments like, obviously it's wrong to be selfish, therefore ethical egoism is false, because it's not about who you sacrifice yourself to, which is very strange. As an argument, that's actually circular, it seems. It's weird because the theory seems very plausible. The quote-unquote disturbing part of it is that you definitely end up with moral asymmetry. Like, if we're both on the island and there's one pineapple, I suddenly have a huge incentive to hit you with it and then eat it instead of just eating it.
And that
but
can't
it
be
also
wrong. There's no standard.
Well, so what's interesting is egoism, right, is an objective morality standard. It's not subjectivity. It's not saying do whatever you want because there's no morality. It's saying, well, look, you should just be doing what's good for you. That's a truth claim, which is interesting. And I think the why be ethical question is actually the much bigger deal than it's ever admitted to. A lot of other issues get brought up a lot, but can you explain why you ought to be ethical? If that question makes sense, it seems like the ethical theory is really bad to me. So for instance, utilitarianism, I think one good counter-argument is, well, let's say utilitarianism is true in some sense. Why should I care about being moral? Well, if you appeal to something pragmatic, you're appealing to its benefit to me. Right? If you're like, if you're a utilitarian, you'll be happier. Well, now you're justifying your ethical theory by saying that it's the egoistic way to act. That's sort of where the motivation for this is, at an intellectual level.
Yeah, it seems to me that any external system, you can always ask, why ought I obey this system? And it becomes an appeal to like self-interest or something like that. Like any externally, they call it externally normative versus internally normative. Like if I disobey God or something, then He's going to burn me or something like that. So it's in my best interest. So it's not an externally normative system. It's still internally normative, right? That's how I see it.
Yeah,
I'm not sure of a lot of the terminology.
Remember, to me, it's just like the oughtness, like what that you ought to do something. It's normative.
Right. So for instance, some of the natural law theories are trying to ground the notion of goodness as actually being a property. Some utilitarians are trying to do a similar thing, where they're trying to explain that doing certain things is doing good, and that goodness has a very robust meaning. And I'm underread on the literature, but that's one of the alternatives. You have to try and somehow establish that following this standard of action is what you ought to do. But it seems like your ethical theory breaks if you have to pragmatically appeal to it. If I say, like, you should spend like all your time trying to end poverty because you'll feel fulfilled, well, I've just given because you'll feel fulfilled as the ultimate standard of how you should act.
That's an argument from emotion or an emotional argument, wouldn't it?
Appeal to emotion, but I think that's kind of what Josh is saying, is that he feels that maybe I hope I'm not mischaracterizing that all arguments for any type of morality ultimately break down into egoism.
Well, either they can just break down, right? You could, Sam Harris's argument, I think it just breaks. I don't think it collapses into a hedonistic appeal. I think his argument is just, in some funny sense, pure. That Harris's view is that there's this thing you ought to be doing, so you ought to be doing it. And he really doesn't care about whether that makes any sense. The advantage is, right, Harris does not pragmatically appeal to you. He's not like, you should do this because you'll enjoy it. Which is ironic when which argument is okay. I'm not sure how strongly I feel about this. I just think it's a very interesting argument that somebody ought to be doing, and I find it interesting. Similarly, if you try and argue that there's just goodness that you ought to be doing, you may never give a pragmatic explanation of why we should care about it. Kant's ethics is not, Kantian style ethics may lack a pragmatic explanation. But a lot of the time, people's arguments are implicitly, they only work by eventually saying, and this will make you the happiest. Except, you can't use because it'll make you happy to justify an ethics other than some kind of hedonistic, egoistic something. Virtue ethics, even.
But yeah, so my position now is like talking about wrongness. It's like talking about unicorns. It just doesn't exist. So people have different preferences and stuff, but wrongness itself, there isn't anything like. Well, first of all, there's like the fact-value distinction that we're not going to like any description isn't going to get you to the values of like what you ought to be doing or something. So just describing a situation like is not going to tell you what you ought to do. And so I don't think that these oughts exist in the world at all, and I don't think wrongness exists. Or like oughts exist, but as like and this is Kant's terminology, hypothetical imperative. And so that's like the goal.
Because it's consistent with my personal morality, you couldn't argue with that. Oh, no.
Why couldn't I?
Because you said there's no such thing as wrong.
Well, if you steal from me, then I mean, I'd probably be upset, and I'd probably, you know, want to hurt you, or maybe call the police or something like that. It's not that all I think it means. Well, here's the thing that people. Like if I say I prefer you didn't do X, or I prefer you didn't steal from me, that's way different than stealing from me is wrong. There's like a categorical wrongness in moral assertions, right?
Well, a weak objection I have to that is that I don't see how you distinguish something, a statement like I prefer you don't steal from me to I prefer green over blue. And yet I think that we experience and we cognate these two statements quite differently. I think so. For that reason, I'm not. I don't buy into error. Well, that's one reason I don't buy into error theory.
Well, it's well, this thing about wrongness, like what is wrongness? Like that's what metaethics is about. Like what is the nature of moral properties? Like where is wrongness in the world, or where does it exist?
It's a conceptual property. It's kind of, I guess, a framework for looking at certain phenomenon that happens in the world. Or as Ben said, it's a way of judging those particular phenomena. But I would say for quite a different purpose.
I think this is a huge issue for not necessarily just atheists, but once your metaphysics, or worldview in general, we'd probably say, but once your metaphysics stops having a moral anchor thingy, God certainly tries very hard to serve that purpose in a lot of systems. Utilitarians are trying the same thing. There's a lot of attempts. Once you don't have the anchor thing, it's very hard to construct a theory that's not nihilistic, because you get theories where you're saying, well, morality is just people yelling their feelings at each other. And it seems hard to actually explain the substantial difference between morality is just people yelling their feelings, and morality is just this weird hallucination people have. I don't know a nice way to frame this. It's similar to most of the arguments you can use against God existing, you can use against morality. So the issue for a lot of atheists is they can sort of implicitly notice this, but obviously it's very, very bad if you can't justify moral statements because you have the Jack the Ripper problem. You can't explain what's wrong with what Jack the Ripper's doing. It's just that he has different tastes than you, or maybe you want to stop him, but you can't actually say he's incorrect. Whereas if somebody says the Earth is flat, I can explain why they're wrong. Maybe I can't force them to agree with me or even get them to, but they are wrong. Whereas if you get these theories of morality as merely feelings, that there's no being wrong about it, which is something that atheists, I think, have a ton of trouble with trying to work out a theory for, and I'm working on it, obviously.
Yeah, I don't want to tip my hand too early either to quote Josh, but I would position myself as a meta-ethical semi-realist, but borderline nihilist. I'm maybe one or two good arguments away from ethical nihilism or moral nihilism.
Nihilism, or nihilism, I pronounce it nihilism. It just has a bad connotation, but you could say anti-realists, because that's really what the distinction is. Like, there's realists and anti-realists.
Nihilist, Donnie.
But I don't think anti-realism is limited to nihilism. I think there are other theories that fall under that umbrella.
No, that's pretty much like what I was saying was the first decision you have to make is whether to be a moral cognitivist or a non-cognitivist, and so those theories like expressivism and emotivism are non-cognitivist theories. Yeah. And once you're a cognitivist, then you can be an error theorist or keep going down the line. And there's a bunch of different moral realist theories, I think, like moral naturalism, moral non-naturalism, different things like that. I don't know all of the different positions, but there's more moral realist positions than there are anti-realist. But I was split. I wasn't sure if I was a non-cognitivist for a while because it seems like they are just expressions of preferences, like when people make moral assertions and stuff. But the whole thing about non-cognitivism is if they're truth apt, if they're actually true or not. So that's like, is it true that stealing is wrong or something like that?
Yeah, I think the word nihilism. I'm using the connotation quite intentionally in that.
Oh, sorry to interrupt real quick. Since we're kind of off the topic of God exists, I'm going to push stop broadcast. I think the Google Hangout will keep going. Just this is being broadcast to YouTube, so I think it'll stop doing that.
Okay.
If we close suddenly, I apologize. Ready?
Yep.